A list of the most endangered jobs. Octomom and her big brood are back in the headlines. Plus, robots will be making Apple's new iPhone 6. These stories and more coming up on The Rundown.
All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Ready, camera,
Go.
talent. Ready, camera, record. 3, 2, 1.
Record.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we take a look at some of the big stories making headlines. I'm your host, John Phillips. Joining us from the nation's capital is our pal, Michelle Fields. And here in studio, we're joined by stand-up comic Stephen Kruiser. Let's go to the top of the rundown, and we begin with Kruiser.
At the top of my rundown, the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border continues. Tens of thousands of illegal immigrant children will likely be staying here in the U.S. after fleeing South America. Take a listen to this.
The laws in this country establish that children who are fleeing abuse, neglect, or abandonment, who have been hurt by their families or the people in whose care they lived, or whose families are unable to protect them, have a place here in the United States. I don't think most of these children will be returned home. I think some of them will be returned home, those who have safe homes to return to. Once we have screened a young person and decided in our judgment, based on the law, that that young person is eligible to remain in the United States, we have great success in making that happen.
John, this is noted right-wing nutjob news agency NBC. They also did an extensive statistical breakdown of it, saying that really all the kid has to do is get across the border somehow, and then they're going to be allowed to stay. It's what you've been saying all along, that the dog and pony show about getting them into the court and getting that taken care of through immigration court is just completely bogus, and now even NBC is admitting it. How long can this administration sustain this untenable situation, do you think, at this point? Because it's getting worse.
President Obama never has to go on the ballot again, so he can do whatever he wants in this respect. Democrats might have to pay the political price, but he won't. And he looks at the United States of America, and he sees one big flop house, one big 3,000-mile flop house from sea to shining sea. And they do not fundamentally believe in borders. And if you look at the world as a whole, you look at the GDP a lot of these countries, you look at the horrible conditions that a lot of children of the world live in, most of the world is a pit. Most of the world is a hellhole compared to the United States. Even the first world countries. You talk to kids in Western Europe, you talk to kids in parts of Asia that do well, they all want to live here. Even the rich people want to live here. So if suddenly you say, all right, you have to have horrible conditions and you have to live in a country that has bad things going on, okay, well, that's 99% of the world. So if you want to come here as a minor, we're just going to take it, come one, come all, take anyone? Give me a break.
Michelle, somebody is going to have to pay the price for this. It's getting worse and worse. This week in Oracle, Arizona, just north of my hometown, Tucson, it's becoming this week's Murrieta, California, where they were going to ship some of these kids there. The protests have started way ahead of time. They don't want them there. It's a powder keg waiting to happen. But who is it going to blow back on? Will it be on the Democrats who are facilitating this? Or is the whole, oh, mean Republicans don't like children narrative going to stick?
I think it's going to blow back on Democrats. I mean, we're already seeing O'Malley in Maryland. He is fighting right now behind closed doors with the White House because there's a site in Maryland that's being looked at for possibly being the place where they're going to house all of these kids. And O'Malley went and gave a speech a week ago saying that he is for, he wants to help, he wants to help all of these young children crossing the border. But that very same day, he went to the White House and fought with them and said, you are not bringing these illegals to my state. And I think it's going to create a lot of infighting because, yes, these Democrats are trying to say that they're all for this, but there's a lot of infighting going on behind closed doors because no one actually wants these people in their state. And, you know, this isn't just an economic issue. This is a national security issue. We don't know who's crossing the border right now. This is prime time right now for someone who wants to do something terrible to the United States to just cross the border because we have absolute chaos over there right now.
I'll tell you what I would do if I was Rick Perry, the governor of Texas. I would take a lot of these kids that are in these facilities in Texas, and I'd put them on buses, and I'd send them to churches in Louisiana. I'd send them to churches in Arkansas. I'd send them to churches in Alaska. I'd look at the political map, and I'd find every state that has a vulnerable Democrat on the ballot, and I'd just ship them there.
It's a brilliant idea. I'm nominating John Phillips for RNC chair after Reince Priebus's next term is up.
All right, Michelle, what do you have for us?
At the top of my rundown, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the Obama administration's foreign policies are making the world a more tranquil place. Take a listen to this press conference held on Monday.
The story basically says right at the top that, quote, U.S. global power seems increasingly tenuous to deal with all these challenges. So my question is, how does the White House react to the notion that the president is a bystander to all these crises?
I think that there have been a number of situations in which you've seen this administration intervene in a meaningful way that has substantially furthered American interests and substantially improved the tranquility of the global community.
Attorney General Eric Holder came out and he said that the inflow of Westerners into the civil war in Syria is, quote, the most frightening thing, more frightening than anything I have seen as Attorney General. You had the foreign policy experts in the Wall Street Journal talk about how this is instability not seen since the 1970s.
They're not exactly an impartial source, though.
A terrorist group. What's the front page of the Wall Street Journal? This was not a partisan. These were not just partisan foreign policy experts. I think that you see a wide range of people looking at basically an all-out war, what's looking like an all-out war in Israel and the Palestinian territories. You see the situation with the terrorist group taking over vast territory in Iraq and in Syria. You see Russian aggression in Ukraine. You see concerns about Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. It doesn't seem like a time to be touting tranquility on the international scene. I mean, do you think the president's foreign policy bears any responsibility for any of this, or there's anything that he can do about any of this?
I think what the president has been really clear about is that he will allow one core principle to guide his thinking about what we can do to advance U.S. interests in each of these hotspots that you've mentioned, and that's the national security interests of the United States of America.
I don't know, John, when you think of what's happening in the world, what's happening with Israel right now, what's happening in Egypt, what's happening all over the world, do you think of tranquility?
Well, the first thing that you learn from this is that this press secretary isn't going to last very long because he was on the defensive the entire time. And these reporters were just like, it was like a cat playing with the ball. He was not in control of that room. He was not in control of the direction of that press conference. And that's a big problem, especially in a second term. But back to the initial point, Kruiser. This is a president who campaigned in Germany. This is a president who was a man of the world, who didn't run as Barack Obama, the senator from Illinois. He ran as Barack Obama, the guy that will bring the United States back, who will bring our standing in the world back. People around the world will respect him. People around the world will listen to him. People around the world will like him. His approval rating worldwide was much higher than George W. Bush's. He gets in, and what happens? The world turns into a disaster. The world, has always had problems, but this guy who said he was going to fix it, didn't come close. They look at him the way they look at every other weak American president, as a guy that can be bullied.
This, to your point about Josh Earnest, first of all, it clarifies what we've always been saying, is that every time someone leaves this administration and you kind of rejoice for a moment, someone worse usually follows. I mean, when Robert Gibbs left the press secretary post, you thought, oh, can't get worse. And then Carney comes in. And now Carney's gone, and Earnest makes Carney look brilliant by comparison. And he really stepped in it here, because you saw right before he used the word tranquility, he was fumbling for words. He was, because he wasn't being given a partisan source. It was the Attorney General of the United States who the other day, and it was refreshing to hear someone in this administration go, oh, the Syria, Iran, and the way they all share the money and the weapons, that's getting kind of scary. So it was nice to hear someone from the administration say that. But back to what your other point about him being a citizen of the world, we were told unequivocally that if he was elected president, it would restore our standing in the world and bring peace and harmony everywhere, mostly because Oprah. And that was the only reason we were ever given. The cowboy diplomacy of George Bush would be gone, and I think 90% of the world right now is probably looking for a cowboy.
No kidding. And Rick Perry hopes that that's what they're looking for. All right, time to move to the top of my rundown, where the list of the jobs that are endangered just came out. It's the top 10 list. It was compiled by CareerCast, and there's a theme this year. It involves jobs involving paper. Topping the list of the most endangered jobs is a mail carrier. Second is a farmer. Third is a meter reader. Newspaper reporters are also fading away, as are travel agents, lumberjacks, flight attendants, drill press operators, printing workers, and my favorite, tax examiners and collectors. And Michelle, this is something that shows us that the world is moving into the digital age at a very fast pace. People aren't writing letters, they aren't sending letters. Companies are finding out that sending advertisements in the mail aren't as popular as they used to be. They don't get the biggest bang for their buck as they used to. And if you work in those industries, you're working for an industry that's probably dying.
Yeah, and it's tough because many of these people don't have a career in tech or computer software programming, or really where we see jobs booming. So they're the ones who are really going to suffer because they don't have the skills that you need in order to get into those industries where you're seeing a lot of job creation. But even though this is very sad, we're seeing a lot, technology increase and improve our lives. So that's a good thing, and we're seeing lots of jobs in places like Silicon Valley. So it's not all sad news.
You know, Kruiser, one of the things that I expect to happen here, if you look at this list of jobs, is that a lot of them are unionized jobs. The letter carriers union's a very powerful union.
Yes.
The unions for the machinists, very powerful. Flight attendants unions. And when these jobs become obsolete, or when we need a lot fewer of them, I have a feeling, especially the government workers, they're going to be able to keep these people on the employment rolls in those positions just because the union's so powerful, even though we don't need them.
Well, one of the reasons that the jobs are still popular is because they get the nice union money. I mean, I have a cousin who's a letter carrier, and he went to law school. Went to law school, decided to become a letter carrier because it was a more stable, lucrative career. And I think you're right. They're going to find a way to extend this as much as possible. You would hope that there'd be some kind of vocational training transition provided by the people, but that's not the way they're going to look at it. They're going to demand the government do that and the taxpayers foot the bill. But that entire list, all of them were, you could say, victims of the digital age. There is one job on that list where they're undoing themselves, because even digital newspapers are going to need reporters. Reporters are becoming less in fashion right now because nobody does any reporting anymore. It is an industry that's committing suicide on its own. They're not, because they've abandoned their First Amendment responsibilities, and they're not doing their jobs anymore.
All right. Now it's time to move on to the sweet spot. This is where we take a look at some of the lighter and softer stories making news. And Michelle, you're up first.
Okay, Octomom pleads no contest to welfare fraud. Nadia Sulman was given 2 years probation in order to serve 200 hours of community service. The mom of 14 did not disclose $30,000 in earnings she made from a porn video. Welfare fraud investigators first began looking into discrepancies in her income after receiving an anonymous tip. I thought that she would get a harsher sentence, but apparently not. Welfare fraud, not a big deal.
I have a passionate dislike for Octomom for two huge reasons. First, she went to the same school I went to, Cal State Fullerton, and single-handedly devalued my degree by about 50%. Second of all, a news anchor at KABC, the radio station where I do my talk show at, Terry Ray Elmer, coined the phrase Octomom. She's the one that created Octomom. So I feel very sorry for T-Ray, because she's had this long and storied career in radio, in news, but when she dies, her obituary is going to say, the woman who created Octomom. Feel very bad for her.
I cannot comment on this without saying something that they'll have to edit.
Well, let's just move on. How about that?
With this one.
What do you have for us, Kruiser?
Apple's iPhone 6 will be made by, you got it, robots, based on what we were talking about earlier. Chinese manufacturer Foxconn confirms that Apple will be the first customer for its Foxbot robot assembly line. 10,000 robots will be making the new iPhone. Foxconn hopes to have 1 million robots by the end of the year. Prior to this, Apple basically had a sweatshop of sorts to build its phone. The new iPhone 6 will come with 2 different screen sizes. This picture of the iPhones was leaked last week, and now there's a humanitarian case to be made here for going completely automated too, because it is replacing what were sweatshops in China. So, but it's the way of the future. They can fight it here all they want. The give me $15 an hour for minimum wage, people can fight all they want. They might be getting it at McDonald's in Seattle. McDonald's has already automated in Europe. It's happening elsewhere in the world already, and it will inevitably happen here.
Okay, here's a crazy scenario. We're told that we need amnesty for illegal aliens because who's going to pick the fruit and vegetables, and who's going to do the jobs that Americans won't do. I was told by a guy in the agricultural industry on the radio program recently that we're not that far away from coming up with machines that can pick the oranges, that can pick the strawberries, that can pick the fruit. And the answer, or the question becomes, what do you do with all these people where that's their skill set, that's their skill level, that's what they do for a living, and suddenly those jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, just evaporate overnight?
Soccer.
All right, on to my sweet spot. A TSA agent stopped a reporter who was flying back to Washington, D.C. from Orlando, Florida, because of the reporter's driver's license. Apparently, the TSA agent didn't know just exactly what the District of Columbia was. Take a listen to the story.
I gave the TSA agent my D.C. driver's license. After looking at it for a few seconds, he demanded a passport. I didn't have my passport, so I asked, why did he need it? He said he didn't recognize my ID. Now, at that point, I was a little confused, started to realize what was going on, and I said, do you not know what the District of Columbia is? Washington, D.C. After some back and forth, it became clear he didn't. I eventually made it through security and told his supervisor. I asked the TSA for specific numbers about how many people file complaints at OIA about problems at the security checkpoints. They refused to release those numbers. A spokesman did say, quote, officers are trained to identify fraudulent documents which can potentially deter and detect individuals attempting to circumvent this layer of security. Critics of the TSA say what happened to me is a sign the problems at TSA are bigger than just not knowing geography.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when this was going on. Calm down there, Juan Valdez. We'll take care of this situation here. I got a guy from a large rectangular-shaped state right behind you that I need to get on this plane.
That's not a problem with TSA, that's a problem with American public education. They can make it a problem with TSA, but it's a problem, and it's not knowing geography. I don't know, I couldn't draw the exact shape of the District of Columbia somewhere, but I know what it is because it's where the nation's capital is. He flunked a high school civic, or an elementary school civics class. Blow it all up.
You ever have this problem, Michelle?
No, because I still use my California ID, so I have yet to have this problem. But it's the TSA. This doesn't surprise me at all.
Very smart move. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. What do you think about robots making your iPhone? And what about the list of the most endangered jobs? We want to know what you think, so be sure to leave your comments in the comment section below. I'm John Phillips for Stephen Kruiser, joining me here in Los Angeles, and Michelle Fields in the District of Columbia, which makes a mean cup of coffee. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.